Welcome to my video. You are either here because you found it on your YouTube feed or you've asked me how to use Solver and I've just directly sent you this link because I have explained using Solver way too many times. So I've decided to make this video. Today we're just going to be learning how to solve for price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium on a supply and demand uh, diagram or between two supply and demand equations. So one would be demand and one would be supply. So mathematically speaking, we're basically solving simultaneous equations on Excel. If you don't know what simultaneous equations are, they're basically two sets of equations with two different variables, and you need to solve them simultaneously, hence the name simultaneous equations, in order to get one variable. And then once you've done that, you can substitute that variable or that value of that variable back in and find the other variable's value. However, we're going to be doing this on Excel today. So what I've done here is I've got two equations. So suppose the top one is demand, the bottom one's supply. So we've got P equals 250 negative minus 0.75 Q, and P equals negative 25 plus 3Q. So mathematically speaking, in economics, we can tell that this is demand, this is supply, because the top one has a negative slope of negative 0.75 or gradient, one may say, and supply has P equals negative 25 plus 3Q, hence 3Q is positive with a positive slope, which means it's upward sloping, which is what a supply curve is. Anyways, those are the explicit forms because you have P equals to something and P equals to something. However, for Solver, we typically want to use the implicit form, which basically means all of your variables on one side and then the other side equals 0. Now, once you've done that and rearranged it, your equation should look like this for these equations. So it'd be 250 minus 0.75Q minus P equals 0 because we are simply subtracting minus P from both sides. And then for the second equation, it'll be P plus 25 minus 3Q equals 0 because we're plus 25ing on both sides of the equation and then minusing 3Q on both sides of the equation, hence we get this. So once you have your implicit form, we want to write the left-hand side and the right-hand side. This is simply for Solver or you to click into Solver so that you can solve for the equations. And visually, it doesn't have to look specifically like this, cell to cell, but kind of like a general guide reference, just because it's visually easier. But some people lay it out differently, like they'll have it vertically, diagonally, whatever you want. Just remember the cells where you put your left-hand side and right-hand side. So once you have your left-hand side and right-hand side, you need to tell Excel that you want to mathematically solve these or simply just solve these because right now, here, just any of these cells, even with like explicit and implicit, it doesn't mean anything to Excel. They just mean a bunch of random characters, and they don't actively do anything when you click on Solver. So in order to tell Solver that you want to mathematically, shall we say, solve it, you have to click equals, and then you just type in numerical values as numerical values. So it'd be 250 minus 0.75, and then to do times Q, you use an asterisk symbol or sign. So you do Shift 8 to get asterisks, multiplied by Q. So what we've created here is P star and Q star. So these are the values that you would usually be solving on paper, and those are the final answers. But obviously, we want Solver to do that, and we need an area for Solver to put those answers into. So we've just created P star, Q star, just so we can visually tell which one is which, and the cell next to them where Solver will be placing the answer. So right now they're 0, but they will change once we use Solver. So once you've done negative 0.75 times Q, negative or minus, then click the cell P. So now we've shown that Excel that this is like the mathematical version of what we've written here. So we'll do the same thing for supply. it'll be equals P, again B8, plus 25 is a numerical value, minus 3 times Q, because 3Q is 3 times Q, and then click enter, and then your right hand side is simply just 0 and 0. And we can tell that because from the implicit form, this is your left hand side, up here if you look at the text area where my cursor is. This is the left hand side, which is where all your variables are, and the right hand side is 0. So anything on the left hand side of equals is considered left hand side, and anything on the right hand side of the equal sign is considered right hand side. And that's the same over here and over here. So they're both equal to 0. Now, the values here will obviously have a value because Solver, well, not Solver, but Excel is trying to basically solve the equation. Because if you do, like, if I put 2 here and 2 here, and then I do equals 2 times 2, the answer will be 4 because the cells have 2 in them. We're trying to multiply them together, which is why we have 250, because there's 250 here, minus 0, minus 0, because these are considered 0 right now. And the same thing for the supply equation, which is why I have values in here, so we can just basically ignore them. And once you've set everything up, you're ready to use Solver. So I'm going to assume that you have Solver, so you just click Data, click Solver, and you get this interface here. So you have your set objective, value of, variable, changing variable cells, and subject to constraints. It looks all complicated and whatnot. All you got to remember is set objective basically means the left hand side or whatever equation you want to set the objective to. So for logical purposes, we're just going to use the top one as set objective. So we'll just click that. And then the value of just basically means the right hand side is equal to 0. So we'll just put 0. And then by changing variable cells, this means that this is where Solver is going to change the cell's value, i.e. changing the number in those cells, because that's how you're going to get the answer. So where you want your answer to be placed, just highlight those 2 cells. So I'm just holding left click, then dragging down, then letting go of left click, and it does it for you. And then since we have a second equation, we have to add a constraint. So here we'll just click add. It'll come up with this little rectangle kind of window pop up. And the cell reference again just means left hand side. Like if you logically speak it, this is the left hand side and this is the right hand side. So you'd here make it equals to, because it's equals here, depending on what you're doing, but simply for now we'll just use equals, and the constraint again will be 0. You can put 0 in the constraint or actually click the cell. I prefer to do 0, but it doesn't really matter. Then click OK. You're brought back to this window, and then once you've done that, make sure this is on. This is usually on, and then select the solving method. Since we're using linear equations, we use simplex LP. But if you're going to use quadratics, you should probably use GRG nonlinear, because quadratics, cubics, anything like quartics, they're all something to the power of n. So they're basically not simple and linear. So they're not simplex, and use nonlinear because they're nonlinear. So you click simplex LP because we're using linear equations, and you click solve, and then there's your answer. So to make sure that your answers are valid, you have these reports here. I wasn't personally told this. My friend actually told me about this. I had no idea if my answers were valid. Luckily, all my solvers in the past were valid. However, to make sure that they're like valid answers and it's not just solver just clicking in random numbers, and then it's kind of like as if like it was hoping for the best for you, pretty much. You would have feasible and non-feasible. But if it is correct, you'd have 3 different types of reports. You'd have answer and sensitivity. So I'm going to click on these for now and try and explain it to you quite briefly. I'm not too sure what they show, but I know they show validity. And then once you've done that, you just press click solve a solution. It's usually highlighted in that, and click OK. And that's usually fine. That's you done. However, I'm just going to explain the answer and sensitivity report. So I looked up into it. And it basically shows you like the history of how it was solved, if it was legitimately solved in your document, if it was sent out. It basically just like gives you a full interrogation of the entire solver and shows if you legitimately have done it or if you legitimately haven't done it, because that's how the marker can tell if you just like typed in random values or if you actually use solver to solve the equations. The sensitivity report basically shows the same thing. Have your cell numbers. It's like E6 here for the left hand side and E5 here for the left hand side. So we'll go, it was E6 and E5, so E6 and E5, showing these two equations because that's what they show, as you can see here, right here. So that's how you verify that you've done it correctly. So that's basically it for Solver. So once you kind of know the steps, it's fairly simple. It's just kind of getting the gist of what you need to do, remembering you need to put it in implicit form, putting your left hand side and putting it equals to like the cell and the numerical value. So basically this, instead of just writing it in normal form, because this doesn't mean anything to Excel. It means something to us, but not to Excel. And then remembering that if you're using or solving a linear equation, you use simplex LP. And if it's anything like a cubic or quadratic, you use GRG nonlinear, just because that's how Excel works. But other than that, I think that's everything. So good luck, and hopefully this helped.